So, let's see, can you hear?
You okay with that?
So this is a period of time that we set aside for open discussion or conversation about our experiences and our questions, our proposals, hypotheses, whatever you have.
Hypotenuses.
Hypotenuses. About the practice, but primarily the meditation practices and your experiences, whatever clarification you feel would be helpful. We try to either provide that or point you in the right direction. It's also a nice, usually a nice mix of experiences in the conversation. So there's no wrong questions, or for that matter, almost the case, no wrong answers either. So, as you wish, whatever you would like to raise as the topic. Jeff, yes.
I'd like to hear more about the instructions, or maybe just hear them again, that you gave tonight as an alternative practice. The piece that I heard was the piece that I heard was to relax relax the mind deeply, and allow what comes up in the mind to also be to pay attention to what comes up in the mind, and make that the focus.
I think the explanation this evening was not as clear as this morning. So that's my experience. Maybe it's more in the genre of I wasn't so clear in my own mind about it. But fundamentally, this is not a different practice from our calm abiding, where we place our awareness upon something in order to anchor the awareness so that it doesn't just drift everywhere. And here, what we're concerned with is our understanding that all experiences arise in the mind without any exceptions. Like, dream up an exception and make that a topic of this evening's conversation. It's like, I don't think there's any such thing as an experience which does not occur in the mind. Even if you cut your finger, the experience occurs in the mind. So, putting aside the dichotomy between science and Buddhism, where science would agree as long as we use the word brain, we can say here that The brain is one of the experiences of the mind. You know, you have a brain, so that's part of your experience. It's okay as a beginning point. You don't need to wrestle with that dichotomy. You know, you have an experience, and the idea is the experience arises. You put your awareness on it. Simple. It could be like. Could be the experience that you're having is continuously changing, like watching clouds go by overhead, continuously changing. And yet it's not so hard on a warm summer day to lie on your back in the grass and watch the clouds go by, and you don't need to ask the question of the dichotomy between the mind and the brain, or any other dichotomies. It's more than a metaphor, it's a nice analogy in a way, because what would be best is if we could relate to the content of our experience, the emotional side of it, the physical experience, having a body and all, if we could relate to it as no more important than the clouds going over. That's very difficult because we identify with the things that go by. That's me. That's my experience, and so on. And that's okay, too. Then, that's my experience is the object to rest the awareness on. That is the only thing we need to do with the dichotomy, is just note that's the experience. And then we might talk to ourselves about that unintentionally, which is mostly what our speech is. Unintentional. Even now I can say most of what I say is unintentional. That is, I'm not reading a script. So mostly it's driven by the interdependence of things that occurred during the day and now and so on. Aside from the fact that it's very difficult to speak like this and put the awareness on that experience, I can say it's not entirely impossible. It's just more difficult. And it's very difficult to put aside the issue of I'm speaking, these people are listening, I am speaking, these people are listening. It's very difficult to put that aside, but not impossible. And just rest the awareness on the experience going by. It goes by, something else takes its place. So, stepping back a little bit in a kind of global way, we can say that all of our meditation practice is designed for discovering in a stable way the very nature of mind itself. So if you just think about all the things that you could explore in this world that you would like to learn something about, whether it's rocks in the desert or fish swimming in the sea or diseases coming and going, you're a physician or a research scientist, we do this stuff. And how do we do it? We look at it. We observe it. We watch it. We look at it with our hands. We feel it. We look at it with our eyes. We look at it with our own experience, recalling other things that are similar. Now, we're actually pretty good at doing those things as a world community of beings. But now what we want to do is, we actually want to deal with it from the perspective of, how does all that work? What does that have to do with the nature of mind? And here again, actually the same looking is all that's required. When we talk to ourselves, we look at ourselves talking to ourselves. And mostly we judge ourselves. No, I'm supposed to be looking, not talking to myself. Then we need to develop this habit, mostly good Buddhists don't talk about developing habits as a positive thing, but we're not all good Buddhists. And so you want to look at the errors as much as everything else. There's no part of it really which is an error. You get up in the middle of your meditation session and go and have a tea break. We would call that an interruption to the meditation. But if you watched yourself do that, when we maintain that level of awareness throughout the whole thing, the meditation was not broken. Since, as we know, the meditation is not the act of sitting on a cushion, nor coming to the center to do the meditation, nor anything else. But what is important is developing a high skill in being able to just keep the mind on all the experiences that are unfolding continually. The good ones, the bad ones, the pleasant, the unpleasant, everything. And then there's the issue of commentaries, which we love to run on all aspects of our experience. And judgments, of course, on ourselves and those who cause the experience, who we either like or don't like. It's endless. And so that just becomes another place to put the awareness. There's not a single judgment required. We are, by and large, a culture of judgment. We engage in it just continuously. In this case, we want to neither encourage nor discourage, but we definitely do want to keep our awareness on it just to see it. Not so we can fix it, but so that we can kind of see its nature, kind of really dig into it. Is that helpful? More than enough? It's okay, you can have a judgment. So. Bryce.
Yeah.
You're still here.
I know. So I was here this morning also. And
That's
was,
right.
Yeah, practicing this.
Is Joan here?
She's not. No, she's resting. I think my question is, so in other methods of Shine, there's, in my experience of that, there's an object to return to. So I notice I'm distracted, and in that moment, I bring my awareness back to my breath or the stone in front of me, and then I rest. It's sort of this, it has those steps.
Right.
In the way that I do it. And in this that we were doing today, there's the moment of recognition that distraction, that I've been distracted, and maybe it's a commentary like you've been saying, but I recognize that. But there's nothing to come back to. It's actually just resting right there in the moment of recognition. That's how it was working right now with me. That's how it seemed to be. Does that, not that it happened all the time, but is that correct? Or?
Well, it's not incorrect.
Okay. That's a start.
You know, you can get a number of big books that contain large sections on the practice of calm abiding, Shine, Shamatha, which we normally do on Sundays. And we don't do all of those, because if we did do all of those, nobody would be here. It's like, you know, you would draw the reasonable conclusion at some point, this is not helpful. And I think it's safe to say, as it is generally taught, actually you don't really need more than one of those practices. But that's a kind of theoretical approach. It is helpful for most people to work from different angles to get an ever-increasing, deeper sense of what's happening and how it's done and how we're doing, all those things. But it's very different, actually, to step into, and we're talking about a kind of shamatha. It's very helpful to intentionally sit down and make an effort to just see our experience, whatever it is. Like my leg hurts, and not to look at it like my leg hurts, but look at the experience. That might lead one to say that or not. It's just, and develop a skillful habit of being able to just watch the experiences unfold. And one of the things that I think is a salient point is that when we say just watch the experience, it doesn't exclude not watching the experience. It doesn't exclude judging the experience, which is another experience. So we develop this sense of, it's just, I am a river of experience. And it's very, at some point it was very odd to call that I am that thing. Because then we see that's just the next experience. The experience of that's me. I am that river. No, actually I'm the experience of I am that river. But now we're at a dead end very quickly. We're meant to be at a dead end. Then you turn around and walk out and do the next step of that. This has not generally been our approach with Shine. And I don't know that it needs to replace that approach, but from the perspective of valuing the diversity of practices in the tradition, sometimes a little more is helpful. It shines a light on things that maybe it's helpful to see more clearly. What we're doing and why we're doing it. I think you could say, from an ordinary worldly perspective, even without any understanding of the Dharma at all, the ability to just put your awareness on your experience and follow it without judgment, without elaboration, without anything, until the experience is one of judgment, in which case you just switch to that as the next experience, and so it loses its bite. It loses its importance. Like, I believe that this person is evil. It just, okay, you don't need to fix that. But the practice is, do you have your eye on it or not? Because if you don't have your eye on it, it probably has its eye on you. Or the other way we might say, it actually doesn't have its teeth in me. I have my teeth in it. That's why I can't get rid of it. I'd like to be free of it. To be free of it is to see it. The teeth holding it is not to be free of it. So there's a certain kind of freedom and openness that comes, I think, from just settling on the experience, whatever it is, and discovering the enormous diversity of experience that just unfolds effortlessly all the time. And we do run on all of those things. Hot and cold, fast and slow, everything. It all affects us. It's just the truth of interdependence unfolding continually. It has no inherent reality, though we assign it that, more or less continuously. I think there's a great, when we have the experience and the mind rests like that on one experience after another arising, it's kind of like water flowing into water at some point. And it loses this, an irrelevant distinction, and we come to just experience the nature of it. That's a kind of clarity. Okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Alan, yeah.
But the
Yes, sir.
original thing of like that, is there a back to? Is there something to go back to?
Mm-hmm.
There isn't, other than that you're there already. So,
Right.
but it feels funny when you're used to like, well, I have to put this down and then I pick this up.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're
There's-
used to a feeling like that,
Yeah.
then you
That's
kind
right.
of go,
That's right.
Yeah.
the wheels spin for a moment, but that's just,
Yeah.
the more you can just see that and just, you're actually back, or you're touching it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's more simple. There's a way in which it's really absolutely no different than following your breath,
Yeah.
other than you've made a kind of a narrower range of choice. You've chosen a narrower range of the stream of experience. But it's still a stream of experience. And there's a certain way in which we use the word object of meditation as kind of a dishonest convenience. It's not really an object,
Right.
but it's helpful. It's helpful to kind of,
An honest betrayal.
yeah, it's an honest betrayal. It does give us. It's kind of like being given a metal detector, and so you turn this on and you say, okay, that's the breath. But then the more you hang out with it, the less it's the breath.
So Bill started moving in the direction of the question that I was going to ask, which is, how is this different, other than a more elaborate explanation or instruction, how is this different than shamatha without an object? It seems as though that's what we're doing. I'm shrinking.
Throw water on the witch. Shamatha without an object is different. And not just because I say so, though I'd like to be able to have that power. So it's different because here we have mostly, usually, an unending flow of objects. Right? We're not picking them. They're being delivered one after the other. And the trick, if you loosely stated like that, the trick is to not identify the objects as they come.
But to not fixate on anything
Yeah.
that arises.
Yeah, that's the trick to it, or one of many that one might use. But shamatha without an object really can be that you only put your awareness on the function of the mind itself. So you could say the mind itself is the object, but we don't normally say that. But I think in some practices, actually, we get to the place where there's no object at all. The mind just rests in its own nature. So that doesn't mean, in my understanding, that the flow of experiences has stopped. Since we say that doesn't even happen at the time of death, it would be odd to assume that it happens at the time in any meditation practice. But definitely when you're not grabbing things all the time, the experience changes. And in one way, I think it would be fair to say, so maybe I'm not the right person to make this proposal, but I think it's possible you could say that the approach that we're talking about is shamatha with no object. But there's more than one approach to shamatha with no object. So again, in the big tomes, describing shamatha,
So relating then to another vehicle, so it seems as though it's like mindfulness of mind and the four foundations of mindfulness.
Yeah, I think so, except the four foundations of mindfulness definitely there's a defined object in each stage of it. So
Like
the
when
object.
when you're watching what arises just as mind, because that's how I thought you were distinguishing this from shamatha without an object.
I think, I can see both sides of that. I think that you could say similar or different things about both of those approaches, but I also think that in the moment of the actual practice and actually successfully doing that practice, that distinction becomes irrelevant. So even that much feels like it's too much to say the distinction becomes irrelevant. It doesn't mean the distinction is not important, because again, it's due to the truth of interdependence. All of these things mix together, and the outcome is maybe impossible to predict. But personally, that's what I find appealing about the practice of bringing one's attention, awareness. Even that's a little bit funny, slightly fishy. Who brings the attention to the object? And if the object isn't there as some substantive thing, then what is it that rests on that, and what does it rest on? These are all kind of philosophical things which are intriguing, but what happens when you actually sit down and put your awareness on the flow of experiences may not match up with all of the cognitive distinctions and things that we so easily make. Mm-hmm. So I'm not quite sure what to say to your question.
So can I elaborate, or?
I'll bet you can. Good evening, Alan.
So it seems that what you're trying to describe here is actually a technique that does take one beyond an object-based shamatha, because when one is doing shamatha with an object, that there is of necessity a dualistic fixation, because there's a subject focusing on an object. Whereas what you're trying to point out, I think, with this instruction, is to let go of that subject-object distinction and just be in the flow of experience.
Yeah, I think that's the ideal. Does everybody here understand the difference between shamatha with an object or not an object?
Like stairs.
I mean, we can sometimes get off in a direction where there's not everyone is tracking.
Seems like this is not your usual approach either. I mean, if people have been coming here for a while and when you're giving this type of instruction, it may not be as familiar to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's we're dealing with real people here, and in order to really put that in the right context, I have to say you are dealing with real people when you come here and listen to teachers who are not only doing their best to manifest what they're teaching and to be clear about those things, but we're also in the exploration of the meditation coming to places where it feels at times like, we've been doing this a long time. And one thing is that means it's not fresh. And not fresh is the antithesis of what our experience in the Dharma is working with, like fresh. We want to experience every last thought, feeling, everything as fresh. Because conceptually, that is the philosophical underpinning of all experience. Whatever you experience in this moment has never happened before and will never occur again. Well, that's hard to learn when you receive very close to the same instruction every Sunday for 5 lifetimes.
All of which occurred in this lifetime.
All of which occurred in this lifetime. Yeah, exactly. And so part of this is just kind of like waking up and thinking, it's time to do something new. And that's all. There's always a risk there because we received our teachings, I will say, with I think no arrogance at all, from great teachers who understood these things in a way which we do not understand. And so we're trying to honor that. And that's not always easy. It's not honoring it to just repeat the same thing over and over like as if it was a tape somewhere and call that learning, teaching, exploring, doing the Dharma. So part of it is when we make changes, we have an understanding that there's a risk. It's kind of like it's one of those things where you come to a crossroads and somebody said, the sign will tell you which way to turn, and there's no sign. And so, but you also can't go back. So you're stuck. So you make a decision on what you're going to do, and then you ferret out the problems and, masticate it for a while until it looks like it's digestible. I think we're a little bit in that process, honestly.
Here. More power.
Yes.
Well, we all do it in our own ways, and maybe one of the big challenges in the Dharma coming to the West in general is that we will not leave it alone, no matter what anyone says, no matter how wise the instruction "don't change these things" is. The first time you sit down and meditate, whether you notice or not, you changed it. So there's a wisdom to saying don't change it, and also there's a wisdom to changing it and allowing it to happen and maintaining an awareness that I'm not yet sure that the change is actually the right change. we're just going to have to look at this for a decade or a year or something to see what it is. So that's partly the point of having, an open conversations like this, that people express their interests, their questions and things, and I can say to Alan what I said because we're good friends, and I appreciate, as I'm sure everybody does, the pointed questions, the analysis, all of these things at all levels. Just as valuing the diversity of people's experiences. I think the truth is that each one of us carries more diversity of experiences than we can possibly honor or even imagine. And it's kind of shocking at times to see the Niagara Falls of experiences unflowing, and we don't know what to do with it. So one thing is, what do you do at Niagara Falls? You stand there and your jaw drops open and you just gaze. And that is not so different from the instruction.
Do you think that shamatha with an object helps you to be more stable to be able to do this other type
Yes.
of practice?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with using a fixed object, nothing wrong with that. But even you move to the breath and we find the breath is not fixed. It's coming and going all the time.
One thing on mindfulness of the mind and the 4 foundations of mindfulness is that this is part of what you're talking about. Things shift around, terminology shifts around a little bit. And with mindfulness of the mind and 4 foundations, we've done mindfulness of the body. And from the context of what we've been talking about here, mindfulness of the body could be considered mindfulness of the mind. It's experience.
Yep.
So mindfulness of the mind, body, mindfulness of feeling, positive, pleasant and pleasant neutral. Mindfulness of the mind in that context is more a matter of being able to settle the attention on what we would normally call more mental processes and the space in which that arises. So that has when we put it in that context, it has those 4 approach insight from a slightly different. They have a different kind of flavor. And part of it is, I remember Alan Wallace bringing up, so you do this and you notice, even within mindfulness of the body, that the experience of sound is not the same thing as the experience of seeing somebody's lips moving. We bring everything together, but just being able to really rest on the different domains of experience opens things up a bit. And the kind of, like you suggested tonight, my experience of it is that it's really more like mindfulness of phenomena, the flow of all experience and appearance arising. So it's good to kind of sort out how we're using language and terminology. And sometimes it just gets too complicated. And that's one of the things. If you give an instruction like you did tonight, there is a kind of a simplicity, and I just kind of pick up my best sense of it and just go for it, without saying, well, I wonder if this is like, if it's like this category, which matrix of my understanding of the different kinds of practices does this fit into? And that's part of actually just making it fresh. You just go and you see what happens, and it's much more fresh than if you've done mindfulness, 4 foundations of mindfulness forever, and you just go back to doing one piece of it.
Yeah, that's the trap, isn't it? Yeah.
Even if it's exactly the same thing as mindfulness of phenomena.
Yeah.
You can trick yourself into
Yeah.
approaching it in a fresh way.
Lama Michael,
Go ahead.
this morning, when you, right at the end of what you were teaching, you said, when we are present in that way, present with the experience as it arises, that's where genuine compassion.
Oh yeah.
And that was when the bell rang and it was like cut.
Fortunately.
So can you say a couple things about that?
Oh man. Wow.
Well, it seems so key. Otherwise, it feels sort of nihilistic.
Yeah, I think
It
I think
can
it
just
is.
feel nihilistic. Yeah,
Well-
okay, the water's going by. What's the meaning? Nothing. More water's going by. Nothing. So that's can be
Sure,
a
this will
dead
help.
end. You know, a kind of a.
No, there's no dead ends. You know that.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying it has that. It can get that flavor if a person isn't really. Like me, not experienced.
I think I meant to reference there something that actually after I'd said that, I had some mild regret. And the
Did you notice it?
Well,
you
you said you know that you
I did. That's what I regretted.
Sorry. Yeah.
Compassion is a very tricky word because we all have an idea of what it is, and even within the context of our Buddhist lineages and levels of teaching and all, compassion takes on a different shape in a way, depending upon where in there you're exploring it. And each one of us, no matter what our spiritual leaning is, will have some sense of compassion, and we're all aware of an understanding of compassion, which is essentially kind of to feel sorry for suffering. You might say, like, just generally, like you see suffering and you feel bad for it, so you kind of share that suffering with others. And that understanding is accurate at one level, but at another level it changes, and at another level it's unrecognizable and from what it seemed to be before. But one teaching that I recall that we're not going to go into tonight in any detail, I'm positive of that. It's a teaching on how karma unfolds. It's a very kind of simple, kind of linear approach to it, which is in one sense not accurate, but helpful from another perspective maybe. So that karma is really just kind of the overt manifestation of interdependence. Like things that are done, said, so on, carry some effect into the near future or the distant future. And often, we might say generally speaking, more often than not, when that karma ripens, we do not recognize where it came from. We have the experience, but we have no sense of where it came from. Or maybe in other cases, we have no accurate sense. In other words, I think you did that to me. You know, and it's not accurate. But nonetheless, we carry some understanding of karma due to just the truth of interdependence. One description of ripening karma is that, for example, I met somebody a long time ago, let's say, I met somebody a long time ago, and I didn't get to know them particularly, but I shook their hand, and we had a little conversation, and then we split up. They went their way, I went my way, and I didn't see them. And then a year later, approximately, that person, we run into each other again. And in that moment, there's a moment of recognition. In the moment that you meet again, there's a moment of recognition. It's very small. And sometimes that space, I don't know the Tibetan for it, but sometimes it's called contact. It's the moment of contact, where the two pieces of karma ripening come together, and they ripen just instantaneously. If you'd had a bad experience before, perhaps you really are feeling good about the meeting. If you had a bad experience, maybe you don't feel so good about it. If it was pleasant, you would feel pleasant about it. But the point is that in that space of contact, in the moment of that space of contact, where you just meet the person and there's recognition, there is a moment, longer or shorter, depending upon who the person is, of utter stillness. It may last a millisecond, or it may last seconds or longer, but that would be like someone who really had kind of deep realization. So in that moment of contact, there's a moment of complete stillness. The mind is completely still. And in that stillness, if you were to define meditation, what is meditation? You could say meditation is maintaining that stillness, not disrupting it. But generally speaking, in the moment of contact, there's a second and we do something. We react based upon old habits and old forms, right? The reaction takes the karma that was just ripened and propels it into the future. And we miss the chance for the stillness. The place of stillness, I'm trying to remember who the teacher was that explained this the first time I heard it, because it's a name that we would all recognize. But he said, in the moment of that stillness, that is the moment of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So, on inquiry, in that, just to close this up, on inquiry, he didn't say that it was just compassion. It was also by virtue of the stillness mixed with the interdependence, the compassion then had an opportunity to become wisdom. The union of wisdom and compassion. So I think that's part of the thing that's appealing about the approach that we just took this evening and this morning, is that it provides a space, a small space, a little interval with every experience that we have. There's the opportunity presented once again to just rest our awareness on it and just be present with the experience. And that's when I was saying that is the moment of actual, genuine compassion. So it doesn't quite match our usual sense of compassion, which always has a subject and an object. There is some, generally speaking, but it also obviously has a feeling component.
For those of us that might not be making that connection of, speaking for myself, between that moment and compassion, is there something you could say that would connect them for us a little more clearly?
The moment of compassion?
Yeah, that stillness. Since I generally have the
Yeah.
basic understanding?
Uh,
Is it pointing to how we're most of the time confused, and that's,
what did you just say?
is it having that moment of stillness and having that awareness of it, is that pointing to us by default that we generally are not there, we're generally confused, and so that might be the tie to compassion?
That's my experience.
I think you mentioned recognition. I think my intuition tells me that there's something about the recognizing, the act of recognition has something to do with the compassion, knowing. I don't really know how to explain it though.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like one piece, it could be no self, no other in that moment. And the other kind of compassion, there's a big self and a big other. So that could be one way to play with considering it.
There's a quick story that we could wrap this up with, because there's hopefully no end to this discussion and this exploration. There's a story about a young monk who was an attendant for an older Lama who was a renowned teacher, and this young monk followed the teacher around and brought tea and anything that this teacher needed, and this occurred in Tibet. And the young monk was always asking for more instructions on meditation, always asking, and actually engaged in meditation a lot, but didn't feel like he had any real mastery of it. So he was always asking, will you teach me that now? Will you teach me that now? Yeah, well, we're going to go to this place, so sometime there we can do it. But then time never came. And then they went to some big festival somewhere. And during it, the young monk got really angry at the old monk. And said, all this time you've been saying you would do something, and now I demand it. So I want it now. And the old monk said, okay, I'll tell you. You know how in your meditation there are times when the object of meditation becomes a distraction. And he used a few more examples of like the faults of meditation. We might say like this happens and then that happens, and you miss this and then that happens, and so on. And the monk kept saying, yes, I know that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. And you know that space, and I don't remember that this is where the contact thing came from, because I heard that first from somebody who was alive. But he said, you know the space between when the mind is settled and then something disrupts that settled mind. You know that space in there? And he said, yes. The young monk said, yes, I know that space. And the old monk said, then meditation is just one thing. You do what's necessary always to make that space bigger. That's all there is to it. That was his all there is to it. I mean, there is a way in which I think we've talked this evening about what is it that's all there is to it. When we say you have a stream of experiences that flow continuously 24/7, it never stops. And even, just to be complete, when you're dead. So we could say that is exactly what we're talking about. That's all there is that experience, flow of experience. And if you could actually just rest your mind on that, like a boat floating on water, there wouldn't be anything else that would be necessary to be done. And the reason why I think that that's possibly true is that it is so difficult and so simple. Like you can see it so easily, exactly what it is you want to do. There's nobody who would say, I don't understand what we're talking about. No, I think it's mostly would say, I understand. I see the experiences coming and going. it would seem they're my experiences. I should be able to relate to them in the way that I want to relate to them. And I want to relate to it by not manipulating or elaborating on any of it, and just being with it. And when you say that to yourself, you also hear some laughter.
Yeah.
It ain't going to work that easy. Okay. That's a wonderful discussion. So thank you all for coming this evening. We should dedicate the merit of this, which is a pivotal point in our own working with the truth of interdependence, that every time we do something, especially if we think it's positive, and this evening's conversation and meditation would definitely qualify for that, then we should think, by virtue of having done this, may it come to pass that it becomes a cause for the benefit of all beings. By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you all.
I'm reminded of the bodhicitta of aspiration and the bodhicitta of application.
Did you decide you didn't want the choice?
That